Halftime's over, but that means we've got another 2 quarters to come. If you've taken a sandwich break, it's time to kick off the second half.
I've got a quick story on Barry. When Barry was an assistant coach in 1966, we got off to a pretty good start. We won the first 2 or 3 ball games, and we're going into Dallas to play Texas. And we're in the locker room before the kickoff, and Barry's up there walking back and forth. He's just nervous as all get out. He's puffing on a cigarette. A couple of the guys said that he had went in the bathroom and shut the door and threw up his cookies in there. Came back out, and he's pacing back and forth, and finally came over there and sat next to me. And I looked at him and I said, "Coach, relax. It's just a football game." You know, he looked at me like I was nuts. You know, he said, "Hell, Warmack, you think you're playing Duncan High School or somebody."
Coach Richard, Barry,
playing Texas. That's all you can.
Hey, and we went on to beat them, by the way, too.
First time
18-9. First time in 8 years.
First time in 8 years.
Exactly right.
Texas.
I don't think I've ever, in fact, I know I haven't ever told you this, Coach, but very few coaches will tell a broadcaster, I don't care how much they trust him, plays they're going to run. There may be trick plays. I don't know whether you remember this or not, but I used to, when you were the offensive coordinator under Chuck, I'd come in and you would tell me any little trick play you're going to run.
We give you
and I really appreciated that. And if you don't mind me relating this about Bud, the first year I did OU football in 1961, we lost the first 5 games. And we were playing Army in Yankee Stadium, which, by the way, was the last college football game I ever played in Yankee Stadium. Well, the Yankee Stadium is a baseball configuration, so the press box was actually outside. And Bud also would let me know on trick plays he was going to run. Well, in those days, the defense didn't huddle, but Army huddled on defense. So Bud devised this trick play where he'd run sweep right, but nobody'd block because he didn't want to make first down. It ended up on the far right sideline. Then you'd come back to the huddle actually in formation, and while Army was defensive huddling, snapped the ball, gave it to Mike McClellan, goes 75 yards for a touchdown. They beat Army, and they won the last 5 games of the year. Well, Bud had told me he's going to run that, like Barry did. And so I, of course, called it, all right. And after it was over, this New York writer who was behind me said, "Boy, you made a great call on that play." I said, "Thanks a lot."
Don't give away all of our secrets. Right. Don't give away all.
You know, Bob, it kind of reminded me back. You know, when as y'all talking about how inventive Bud Wilson was and what he would do was when we played the swinging gate and a lot of different plays that nobody had ever seen before. And I remember we played against Texas and nobody knew where to go. I mean, we were all over the field. And I just thought it was such a great invention of football. I don't know where he got it all from, but it's called the swinging gate. I don't know whether y'all remember it or not, but it was a lot of fun to play that type of game.
Coaches do things like that.
Well, I think the beauty of showing something like that, just like the or the pass on the punt last night, you got your opponents working on it the rest of the year, whether you practice or not. They spend X amount of practice time working on that stuff. You remember that formation a couple of years ago where Bob and his staff, Mike Leitz, a ninja deal where they put the 2 tackles and the 2 ends and a back out wide on each side and had a guard and 2 guards in the center in there with a quarterback. People work on that for hours at practice, you know, because it can embarrass them if they're not ready, and it takes time from the practice that they need to be working on their base.
You know what's so unusual, though, is the fact that you got all these wacky plays that are getting run, and you got coaches that have balls enough to run them at times that you wouldn't think a coach would run them, and whether it's Coach Stoops, you know, or Coach Switzer, you know, and it takes me back to that game, you know, my favorite game, and I went to Oklahoma primarily to play 2 teams. That was Texas and Nebraska. And that my whole world evolved around Texas during October and Nebraska for the Big 8 championship. And I remember my first year we went to Nebraska. I think they were ranked 1, and we had no shot at getting in to the Orange Bowl, and they were unseeded, and we hadn't won the Big 8 championship in 2-3 years. And you know, we just believed that we were going to win, and we ended up winning that game, and we ended up beating them and establishing a dominance over Nebraska that year in '85 or in '84, and then again in '85. But in '86, we went up there and we were behind, I don't know, 17-7. And this kind of relates to establishing a rapport with the younger players on passing on tradition. And we were behind. I mean, we weren't going to win that game. But we were behind. And 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 we according to the younger players on the sideline. But I don't think you could have told one senior or one junior, one person on the field that was involved in that game that we didn't have a shot at winning that game. And I remember, you know, it was the fourth quarter, we're down 17-7, and Coach Switch is over there going, "We got to get a big play. Boss, get me a big play. Get me a play. Get me a play. Get me a play." And everybody's, you know, trying to panic and scream, and the offense is out there, and they're doing some good things. They're just not getting the punch, you know, down the field, and you know, and I start hearing some of the sophomores going, "Well, you know, the Sugar Bowl ain't bad. We'll go to the Sugar Bowl this year." We went to Orange Bowl last year. Care Sugar Bowl. Let's go to New Orleans and party. And I remember looking at you know, some of the seniors, and I said, "Good, you got to be kidding. We are not giving this game away. This is not going to happen." So I remember we went out there in the middle of the field, and you said, "God, you know, Boz, get me a big play." And I went in there and I ripped that frickin' ball out and gave the offense the ball, turned around, and you know, we ain't doing anything. All of a sudden I see you're catching the ball down the sideline, you know, and we needed another play. That made it 17-14. We needed another play. Go back in the very next series. Rip the ball back out. And all of a sudden you start seeing the guys on the sideline, sophomores, "Hey, we're going to Orange Bowl." You know, and instead of, you know, we're not going down for the tie. We don't want a tie. And I know he doesn't want a tie, because he's not like Fred Akers. He's not going to go down there and just kick a field goal and say, "We got out of here." No, we're going to go into a win. You know, and you established, you know, a tradition of, whether you call it Sooner magic or just belief in whatever play you're going to run, as crazy as it may be, whether it's a tight end reverse on third down and you're into the field, or a fake punt, and you know, right after a touchdown against Alabama on national TV, and you're number one. It doesn't matter. It's Sooner magic, and you believe in it, and the players have to believe in what's being called for them to run that stuff and give 100% effort. And that was my favorite play. I mean, my favorite game, the Nebraska game.
And there was nothing like, you look down the sideline, there's Billy Sims and there's Greg Pruitt, and those guys are sitting on the sideline. You're playing against Nebraska. They fly in town from being in the NFL, sitting there, and that's that tradition. You look down that sideline and you go, "We got a ball today, guys." The boys that came back to see us play, and you know, you go, and I mean, that was just so intense. I got to make a big play. Billy Sims is watching me. I got to make a big play, man. That's Sims down there, Dixon. Do you know that's Billy Sims? That's what I was, you know. And so for us, you know, we looked up to those guys. We really did, and that was tradition that Coach Switzer kept alive, of letting those players come to the sideline. And you've been in the middle of a game and it get tough, and they'll come down there and say, "Come on now, this is Oklahoma. Y'all better come on. This is Oklahoma. Let's get it done, Jackson." And they would talk to you on that sideline just like they were assistant coaches. Boy, this day and age, man, in most schools, the coaches say, "Get away from here. I'm trying to coach my guys." Yeah. You know, and just Oklahoma was so different in that, and we would come back and win some big games like that.
That was one of the things that when I was at OU, that we never thought we could lose. Yeah. I mean, I don't care how far we were behind. If we were behind, we never thought we were going to lose. And I think that time we lost to Nebraska that one year. That time we lost to Nebraska that year, when the game was over, we were still anticipating to win the game, because we never thought we would lose the game.
That was up in Lincoln, wasn't it?
And when we got a chance to play Nebraska again, that just blew us away, because we knew we were supposed to win that game. So we never thought we could lose a game.
You know what's amazing about the history of this program is that we had to win. It was like, it was no exception. Each and every year, we wanted to compete for a national championship. And if we failed, if we lost the game, it felt like it was over. And some teams can have 7-4 season. It's a great season. At the University of Oklahoma is unacceptable.
You know, part of that, though, Rick, is because, and Jake and I were talking about this flying up, winning is a core value for people that play football at Oklahoma. And when something is a core value to you and something intersects that and threatens it, you respond violently. My mom was a missionary for 26 years, and one of the things she was fond of quoting scripture, and she used to talk about the kingdom suffering violence and the violent take it by force. I don't care if you're a Christian or you're not. If somebody threatens something that's important to you, you have to respond. It's almost instinctive and compulsive. You have to do it. And I think part of recruiting as a coach is recruiting people with that personality. Brian talked about it a minute ago. I think part of Barry's charm, Merv had it, but all in a different way, packaged. The timing of how you communicate to people is as important as communicating to them. Right before we're playing Nebraska, I'm standing in the hallway there, 80,000 people screaming in the tunnel. Barry comes down and he looks, and he squints those eyes and looks at me and says, Spencer, I just want to tell you something, son. Sure. I love you. I'm saying, man, I'm trying to get hype for 80,000 people up and you're talking about you love me. Well, see, Barry knew how I was wired. I'm a relationship guy. I'm a people guy. I love people. And I love commitment. I love focus. I love being around people who understand the value of family. I was trying my best to be Billy Sims that day.
That's all right. I was trying my best to be Joe Washington.
And I think I had 146 yards or something like that. We were splitting time with 5 different backs. But that inspired me to such a great level. And I'm sure maybe he didn't say that to another player. But with me, he knew what button to push with me. And I've been accused of almost deifying Coach Switzer in this regard, but I remember making a statement public one time. I said, Barry is like the Apostle Paul. He's all things to all men that he may win some to Oklahoma football. and that's the way he is, you know. But he knew how to push that button, and that's what it's about. It's about family.
I think one of the things that I learned at Oklahoma about winning and losing, I remember, I guess it was I was a sophomore. We lost 3 games, and they had headstones between Washington and Jefferson House. You know, like we had died, and we had an emergency meeting about. And I said, wait a minute,
They had a for sale sign in his house.
Yeah, I mean, immediately you know how important winning and losing was at Oklahoma. And I remember my sophomore season, I went to Texas for the first time. Very nervous in Texas. Punt return. I dropped 1 punt. Never returned the punt. I called a punt at Oklahoma again. Because you just didn't make those mistakes. But I think the level of play and what they expect of you is set so high that even if you get close, it's enough to win. And they've been very successful because of that.
You know, but on top of that, one of the things we don't talk about is, and I hear this from you guys about Coach Wilkinson, and I know this about this guy, there's not enough credit given for being a great football coach. Great recruiter, yeah, he washed dishes at my house and we all loved him. And my mama loved him, that was good enough for me. But I don't think that Barry Switzer has ever gotten enough credit for being an X's and O's guy. And I don't know how much patience you would have had to have. I don't think I have enough. But to switch offenses in the middle of the season and to open up at Texas, not fare well at all, shall we say. But then to go on and not forget teaching and coaching and that little 5-yard strip. Remember that little 5-yard strip out there at AstroTurf? Hey, man.
Jack,
we had 20 hours a week out there, you know.
Not only that, people come up to me all the time and say, well, Coach Switzer, he's player's coach. I say, yeah, he's a player coach, but we had 2.5-hour practices, and we had, you know, we ran sprints, and everything was organized, and the practices were not easy. And, you know, we got a half a popsicle. You know,
yeah, the 3-a-day practice.
Yeah.
But I think everybody concurs that the one thing that we never wanted to do was look on the sideline if you're on the field and disappoint the head man.
Yeah.
You never wanted to look
one
at
of the
that.
great plays, and Coach has such a good memory. I think it was Wisconsin or Utah we played where they were taking the pitch man. Hey, well, I know you will, but when they were taking the pitch man, the lead man, they were taking the pitch man out of the play. Right. And the adjustment we made, because I remember in the play, the first time we tried to run the play, they took the pitch man out and the guy said, nah, it ain't gonna be none of that today. So we went to the sideline, and the adjustment was that the lead guy, we let him take the pitch man, but the lead guy would slow down and become the pitch guy. So the second time I ran the play, this guy tackles me. I let him tackle me, right? And he, yeah, I told you. I said, hey, man, you better look down the field. And then the lead man is gone. It's touchdown.
That was against Utah State. They'd seen UCLA do that stunt, under what we call the underneath stunt. They took 3 who was supposed to take quarterback 9 technique in and brought him underneath the flare back and hit the offside pitch back. Quarterback comes down the line. Texas quarterback, first time Phillips comes down there. He pitches the ball back to Burleson. Well, hell, he's on the ground because the ends knocked him down. The ball's rolling on down the field, and the flare back's wondering what in the hell happened back there. So we had seen this. Well, how you handle a stunt? Well, we worked Pruitt and Wiley on. As soon as we recognize the stunt, as you come out of there, you recognize the stunt, just chuck your motor down, and you become the pitch back. Milton recognizes it. Oh, they're using an underneath stunt the first time they did it. Next time they do it, Joe Wiley chokes it down. He's the lead pitch back now. He pitches the ball to him. He runs 72 yards for a touchdown. We didn't see the stunt anymore. Never saw the stunt again.
In 1966, Jim McKenzie came to OU and brought. Talk about it, Coach.
Well, yeah, I came. You know, we talk about Bud and we talk about my era, and you know, we really have missed a lot of guys that have all contributed to making this thing happen. Bobby hit on it a while ago. Is that, you know, I felt great about what we did in coming here with Jim McKenzie. Jim McKenzie was someone that I know could have had a tremendous impact on Oklahoma football had he not had the tragedy of coronary in April 26, 1967. I'll never forget the last time I saw Jim. He walked in my office. We're in spring practice that day, and he said, "Hey, don't run anybody off today. We're in the middle of spring practice." And Jim Riley was on the field. That's the way Jim said, "Tough spring practice." He said, "But don't run anybody off." We had Pat James there, and we had Chuck Fairbanks, Galen Hall, myself, and some other coaches, and Buck Nystrom. And Buck was hired the next year. Buck wasn't there. Chuck, that was a hire of Chuck. I was working the offensive line then. Homer Rice, and so what happens is that Jim, and that night, he had flown to Amarillo to see Monty Johnson, Amarillo Tascosa High School quarterback, who went to Texas, then transferred to Oklahoma and ended up playing Oklahoma. The only guy in history of the two schools that played at both schools. And Jim went to see him that night, Leon, and came home, had that tragic coronary. But I think about if Jim had been here, he would have had the success that Chuck and I both had, because if he had had longevity, he would have enjoyed the success that I enjoyed. But Chuck ended up being the head coach, and Pat James was on staff, and I was here, and they contributed greatly. And the thing I think about it is that staff took Bobby Warmack's group of players already here, like Bob Stoops comes in the second year, wins a national championship. You don't win at Oklahoma unless there are good players there. Oklahoma's always had good players. Kids that lived in the state of Oklahoma went to the University of Oklahoma were good football players. I don't care what their record was, what they accomplished in the 90s. Bob Stoops proves you had the nucleus of talent to win a national championship. Well, when we came here, really, that happened for us. We were fortunate. Y'all had some guys here. For whatever reason, those guys, you had Bobby Warmack. You had Eddie Hinton. You had Granville Liggins here. And Jim Riley, we lined up and were able to get on the field, orchestrate, and those guys played their butts off, and we won some football games, and all of a sudden, Oklahoma was back a competitive football team again. And those guys are really a part of that. And, you know, we forget that. You know, when we really do. We forget talking about Barry, Bud, and Bob, and all this. So many people, assistant coaches. You think we won because I stood on the sidelines? Bullshit. You win because of the talent that was in this room, out there orchestrating and playing what those assistant coaches all contributed and made happen as from Monday through Friday, preparing that team to play and getting those kids wanting to play the game and having the willingness to prepare. And then everybody likes to play on Saturday, and there's a question about when we put the silks on, let's go play like hell. But assistant coaches make it happen, players make it happen. And I've always been too damn honest. I always should have told the media, by God, it happens because of me. You know what? There are those coaches that self-promote themselves, and we've all seen that. But I've been too damn honest because I know what. You've got to recruit good. You got to get good players around you. You got to get good assistant coaches. It takes a team effort. It's a we game. It's an us game. Eddie knows that better than I do. You know, he's been in the game longer than I have.
It's all part of coaching.
That's right.
We just learned a few years ago, though, it takes a leader.
Well, that's true too, but it takes every ingredient, every one of us. And then there are those leaders. Because I've been one of those guys, Eddie, about the media. Media's always got the answers. You know, they fabricate all the reasons why, and the fans do that say, well, he's not a head coach, you know, he's an assistant. A coach is a coach. Well, he doesn't know offensive football because he's a defensive specialist. If you're a coach, you're a coach. If you coach offense, hell, you got to know what they're doing on defense. You coach defense, you got to know how they're blocking schemes, how they, you know, how they're trying to attack you, how to stop it. A coach is a coach. And it just, you're fortunate to be around good tutors, you're around good people, you learn from that. And I had the experience of being around Merv Johnson, Frank Broyles, the Jim McKenzie's of the world, Wilson, being around guys at Arkansas when I came to Oklahoma. I had pretty good tutoring. A guy goes to MIT or to Harvard, there's pretty good tutors there. You learn from your professors there. If you get, if apprenticeship in football is pretty good at those places, right? I'm talking about academically, but at football at Oklahoma, Arkansas, and you learn from those people, and it's all those people making things happen.
Hey, Barry, I think one of the cornerstones of Jim McKenzie's program was the fourth quarter class, and that's something that we haven't talked about at all, and that probably was the hardest 1 hour workout any of us had ever been through.
You know what, you're right, Bobby. We couldn't do that. Coaches couldn't do that today. We'd get run off, and these guys would quit. These guys would quit. That's really, I'm serious, because we wouldn't mistreat you great athletes like that. We were, not like what we did, not like what these guys did. You have no idea. You have no idea what they were doing. Oh, Coach, this is how stupid. This is how stupid we were. We took fishing wire, chicken wire, this high off the ground. We put it as big an area as this room. We got you under it over there, and we got another guy, and we gave you a stick.
I played like that hooks the other day.
You had to wrestle. We tore more shoulders up doing stupid things. It's like head-on tackling. Head-on tackling is the dumbest thing in the world. Back two guys off running together. What the hell does that prove?
Is that Oklahoma drill?
You know, that was Neanderthal coaching. We had Neanderthal spring off-season practices. Hey, wait a minute, wrestle, see who can take the stick away from each other. Well, hell, you ain't gonna turn loose that stick, but you tear out your damn arm, roll over,
Jakey,
fight.
did you all do that?
No. But we kind of did that a little bit in the 80s because we had enough moxie on both sides of the football, and I think we talked about it at lunch at the break. You know, you never pit the number one defense against the number one offense because you get a bunch of catfights out there, and then egos get bruised. You know, so I know, huh?
Well, that's with pads and headgears on. I'm talking about that in shorts with, you know, you're all
you guys are just playing torture.
Y'all would get up and get down, quickness and speed and agility. Theirs was just punishment.
Rex Norris used to have these bags about 4 feet high and make the defensive linemen run bags. And all we used to do is watch film of Dewey Selman.
And think he ought to be fined $2,000? That's right.
Well, see, they needed my input because, as I noticed, they're kind of getting lambasted by the old, you know, the old regime there. So they needed me to chime in on that. But all I know is that Rex Norris used to show Dewey Selman, the Selman brothers, run these 5-foot bags through the lateral drills, and that's something we used to do every practice. I'm like, well, you know, I can't even jump that high, and we're going lateral through the bags, and I was like, for some reason, Rex Norris, that's the thing he focused on. He used to film this. Until this day, I'll never want to see a bag again.
Rex was a sissy compared to Pat James. I promise you. I promise you. He was a sissy.
Pat just passed away a couple weeks ago. Yeah, we just lost Pat. Yeah, great defensive coach.
Plus, Coach, wasn't part of it that back then there wasn't any real limits on how many kids you could have on scholarship, and didn't you coaches, in fact, go, we need to run about 10 more off today because we can't feed them? Wasn't that part of it?
Well, you know, y'all were about the same, except for you. You're a difference maker. You know, there's one or two. We didn't care. You know, back then, it didn't make any difference who left because you're going to play with who stayed, and they're all the same.
Hey,
there wasn't any difference.
That first year, there were only 2 difference makers, Jim Riley and Granville Liggins, and all the rest of us, there were like 150 plus that started that program. And when Barry and them came in there in '66, they didn't care who they ran off. You know, they just knew that there were going to be a bunch of them that they were going to run off, and whoever remained, they were going to be able to go to war and win with those kids. And I remember the first time that I walked into that fourth quarter class down there on South Base in those barracks, you know, and we walk in there and look around and we see all these stations about all these drills that we're going to be doing, you know, and there was something that looked kind of out of character over there, and I looked around, there were some trash cans all around the room, and they had black plastic, you know, in the trash cans, and I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? They're not going to be serving cookies and beverages here, you know. There's not going to be any trash to be thrown in those trash cans. And toward the end of that hour workout, you found out pretty quick what those trash cans were for. You found out what everybody had for lunch. I guarantee you.
How many quit? How many left?
They couldn't
ran a
quit
bunch
then.
of
We
them
locked
off.
the door when we went in there. Had them sliding doors and Barry. We locked the door where they couldn't get out.
Well, how many
They had to quit after we got through.
A bunch quit.
Oh, I had a bunch.
I'll tell you this. In 1969, my senior year, there were 7 kids in the junior class left. 7 kids in the junior class.
Yeah, remember
You
we
guys
could
gonna
take
have cooler
50,
jets
55
So
back
you're
then.
running off.
Now, hang
Two
on,
thirds
Barry.
out.
Oh, that's
When I
what
was down
happened
there in
to Zabel's
46,
class then.
there was 375 uniforms checked out. And there wasn't any limit on scholarships. I mean, I say this, Tatum, of course, was a coach then.
Right, Jack?
Yeah. And he said, he'd tell you this to get you to go to school. If you can live, I mean, if you can walk, ride, or talk, you know, and run, you got a scholarship. Of course, after you get down there for about 2 weeks, then they put you, well, we used to have one-on-one, you know. I don't, did y'all ever do this? Put the 2 dummies out here and put 2 guys running head on each other?
Yeah, stupid stuff.
Did you ever get anybody hurt?
Yeah.
Doing it? Yeah, I think it was too then. I wouldn't tell Wilkinson that or Jim Tatum. But they ran, they would take you and see how big you were, how fast you were, and how you move, agility. And of course, then they see you hit. I mean, you can tell right quick with Stan West and me, you're going to knock the hell out of each other, but that's what you wanted us to do. And it dawned on me what they were trying to do. We ran off, when they say line up, there'd be 30 left guards. Then what they do is what I say, they run you through all these exercises. Of course, they get it down right quick without hitting. They'd be down to 10 or 15 within a week or 2 weeks. And pretty soon, of course, you're down to 5 or 6, so they keep those 5 or 6. I mean, they were the biggest, the strongest, and meanest, and the fastest. I mean, they looked all of it. And that was Tatum's system. Tatum was a hell of a coach, too. Did you know him?
I didn't know Jim. Just knew it was.
Yeah, he was head coach before Bud got here.
Right.
And Bud wasn't quite that bad, though, but he was bad enough. But I don't know whether you guys went through that kind of, you must have done it, but I don't see how they did. That was so damn tough, I don't see how he's still alive.
While you've got the floor, let me just ask you, because I'm learning. You guys know the answers, I'm learning. Who, from your perspective, is the best player to ever play at the University of Oklahoma? Maybe the best athlete, the all-around best contributor?
Leroy Selman.
Now, wait a minute. You're talking about, how'd you like for Leroy to punt for you? Throw a pass or run for a touchdown? I don't believe he'd be too good, but I can tell you somebody who would.
Who's that?
Jack Jacobs.
Yeah.
Indian Jack Jacobs was probably the best, and he was a damn good defensive football player, too.
He played everything, didn't he?
Huh?
He was everything, offense, defense.
Yeah, and he made All-Pro, I think, up in Canada. I lost sight of it a little bit. I think he played with me at Green Bay for 2 years. He played at Washington Redskins for about 4 years, and he was damn good football. He holds the record here at OU still on punts, but he was one hell of an athlete. I watched him play in high school. And
about
he
5
did,
times a year in Edmonton. He was at Winnipeg, and I was at Edmonton. And when I was in the service, he got me a tryout. I was 18 years old, and about the next youngest guy was 24 or 5. He got me a tryout at March Field, and that carried me through the service. And you're right about what a great football player he was. He and I were great friends for, ever after that.
yeah, but he was also a good defensive football player.
Oh, yeah.
He was one of the best.
And a great punter. Best punter I've ever
Anybody,
seen.
oh, yeah, nobody beat him.
The guy that I think holds the longest average per punt is sitting in his room. Am I right about that, Bob Berry?
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Well, who are you talking about?
Joe Washington.
Joe,
He did. The longest average per punt.
Did you, Joe, you? Oh, hell, you're not even the same class as you kicked, quick kick.
He did.
That's right.
Well, that's not fair. I'm talking about punt. That's not real. That's not real.
And artificial turf. So
Coach, don't you think Keith Jackson would have been a good center killer? Sorry about that.
I got a great Joe Washington story.
You got a Joe Washington story?
I got a great one. A good friend of mine who's coaching at the University of Pittsburgh at the time when little Joe was there at OU, and he was, in fact, Dorsett, I think, was he a junior that year when they came to Norman?
He was junior, 75, yeah.
And Harry was telling the guys about, these guys are pretty good, blah, 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 blah. And Joe come around, took a pitch, and one of their defensive backs broke down to tackle him, and Joe just hurdled him, just jumped over him. went on for a touchdown. And that young man went over and he said, "Coach, you told us they were good, but you didn't tell us they could fly."
Joe was pretty good about that.
Was that the same game that Scott Hill knocked out Tony Dorsett?
Yeah, hit him right in the throat. 4th down and 1. They ran an option pitch with the
No,
lead
he had
block
15
coming out.
yards. He had 15
No, he had
yards
17
on-
yards and 13 carries.
13
Not much.
carries.
Whatever it was low.
Yeah. Like, what, 1.2 yards per carry or something?
Oh, boy.
You know, that's it's funny you guys talk about how prolific the offense is, and you're always talking about hanging half 100 on them, and from a defensive perspective, I'm always taking great pride in how mentally and physically tough we are on defense, and that's kind of the mark of a great program because they continually, and even to this day, they look for ways to make both sides of the balls, and now they're implementing the special teams and how important that is, but both sides of the balls and how important that is to continue the tradition, the way the game changes. Today, I mean, we played Alabama yesterday. We beat a good Alabama team, but we beat a good Alabama team with great defense and smart coaching, and we did it with offensive plays that were, that were timely and done at the right moments of the game, and it was just, that's the continuation of how programs continue to keep going. And we talked a little bit earlier about the 90s, and all of a sudden we kind of hit a lull, and you were talking about some of the great players and great coaches that, Coach Stoops won in the national championship in 2000, and I don't know how you guys feel about it, but when I was playing there was a coach, and we all know him, and he took over the program at a time when, we were kind of dark and we were down, and, we needed somebody from inside our family to help pick us up, and that was John Blake. And I don't think he's ever been given real credit that 2000 season when Oklahoma won the national championship, those boys were John's boys. And they were out there, and John went out and got great character players, and he chased off all the ones that were the bad apples, and he put Oklahoma's program back on the map. And Coach Stoops done a great job of taking it to the next level. But, again, it was one of our own inside our family that planted the seed, and it helped grow it and make it a plan again.
That's a very strong point, and Brian, not to belabor the point, but I think what happens is, and we were just sharing this a minute ago, we live in a world of images and impression. Most people aren't interested in pulling away the veneer to look at what are the substantive reasons why things happen. I can sit here and give you a dissertation on the economics, how they differ from Bob Stoops to this, to John's regime, and to even Gary Gibbs, and compare and contrast all those deals. But you're absolutely right. There has to be an infrastructure in place, and in this particular case, it's talent that facilitates future success. Switzer talked about it being in place when he came on board, and then he added what was necessary. John may not have had the organizational wherewithal, but he had the passion, he had the ability to appeal to young kids and get that talent here. That core was here. Now, what he lacked necessarily, and I have to say this, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, we have compared and contrasted him against legends who worked with a different template, a different historical paradigm. But when the playing field is level and it's even and you're playing by the same rules, and I'm not trying to be coding in anything in my conversation here, I'm just telling you like it is. There's a different set of rules that an African-American coach plays by. Here we are right now, and I cover the SEC for CBS. There's not one African-American coach in the SEC. There's one African-American coach in Alabama that probably should be Alabama's head coach right now. We're getting better. We're getting to the point where we're making progress in that direction. But when we talk about this, and we are family, and we have to be able to talk about this, let's put everything in its proper historical paradigm. That's the reason why I can be calm and talk about this issue, because I'm looking at it from the big picture. I'm not going to be blind and just walk into a place and say, you need to get a black coach. No, that's stupid. That's stupid just to say you have to have one for the sake of having one. That's not how things work. But we have to understand the historical paradigm, how we got to this point right now where we have these attitudes, that it's taken this long to get to that point. Because I know a lot of qualified coaches that happen to be African-American that can coach in this country. But we're moving. We're getting better. We're getting better. And that point, I think, is a very valid point.
But I understand what Brian and you're saying, but, I mean, you have to have a core of players, and it's just like Coach was saying, it's all about the players. Well, in this case, and I'm not saying anything against John Blake, because I think he's a great guy like John, but he had the core players, but it would take someone like Bob Stoops, and I'm not, to go in there and implement his program and to organize and get those players play at a passion that he wants.
I can see that. That was the point I was making.
And I'm not saying, and I think, I mean, if it wasn't for John Blake's recruiting, the players that we had for 2000, obviously we wouldn't have had the success. But with that said, they had the coach that went in there and tweaked it and made some decisions and maybe got more of the backing of people within the organization. But he had the vision to make those things happen. You can't find that.
You're also talking about implementing a philosophy, and that's what Bob did. Bob implemented a philosophy on a group of core players that were existing at the time Bob took over. And Bob took over a set of players that John had gone out and recruited. And I think everybody knows John and the way he goes and he attaches himself. There's no white, black, or rich, poor. There's nothing with John. You get exactly what you get with John. And John brought back the seed of family, and it was not there in the 90s. I think Hans Snellenberger, when he came in, it was a total disaster. And I think everybody realized that. They needed somebody from within, and they went out and found the one guy that everybody truly loved. John was the right person for the job at that time.
One thing I think is a common denominator, with what the University of Oklahoma is about, and I think the success of the University of Oklahoma is the fact that the common denominator has been that as a institution, the one thing that we've been able to do is embrace, I think, the people that have really made the program from its very beginning. And I think the people that have had the success in this particular situation have basically done that more so than anything else. Being a coach's son, you have a tendency to look at coaches and you think, for the most part, just because you think you're a coach and you want to be a coach, you can coach. Well, the fact of the matter is, just because, you are doesn't mean that, you are going to be a good coach, whether it's black or white or anything else. But I think the common denominator here at the University of Oklahoma, of course, everybody knows you've got to have good players. You've got to have, the support of the community. And I think what really separates, this program from anyone else's program in the country, the fact that, we have a base of people that have been here, that have supported this program, that have been included in this program, that, that have been welcomed back into this program. And I just think, when you can have that type of situation where everyone respects that particular part of it, and you have people willing to respect and embrace from every particular age in a setting, hey, you're just going to continue. And for us at the University of Oklahoma, we hit a spell where we didn't have that, where we all felt that we could come back and be a part of it. And I think, if you can continue that to where, the guys are at this particular point that are going to graduate, they're going to look up and one day see their ghost hanging on the walls, for the other kids to come along.
I'd like to tell a story, and I just want to see if it's verified, but this Bart Connor, who was our Olympic gymnast, I asked him a Port story, and he said that when he was a freshman, that Port had his orientation over, I guess, in the Jeff House dining room, and he said he got up and said one of the things that he was hammered on was the parking. He says, you have to have one of these. He holds up a permit. If you don't, you're going to get a ticket if you park the wrong place. Just today, I parked the wrong place and got a ticket. Now, what does that tell you, Mr. Sims? It said, Mr. Sims says, that tells me that cop didn't know who you were.
I didn't know him that well.
Hey, what's the other shit? I'll have you so deep in the ditch pen you think a submarine is an airplane.
And I tell you, he wasn't just talking. I was having some problems with some grades, and that meant that I needed to be studying. And he told me if he called me, I better answer the phone on the first ring. And we played USC. I rushed for 215 yards. I figured I could, lay in the bed and let it ring twice. It rang twice, and I was washing dishes.
There was guys that didn't eat for 2 weeks because their name was on the corkboard. Come see Port, and they would never eat.
You always hear rumors about Port too. Is if he closed that door, you was in real big trouble. And so when every now and then you go into Port's office, you always pay attention to whether or not he opened the door or closed that door, left it open. You always watch that door.
Then he'd have you back in
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
What were you going to tell me before? You said you had a story about one of your coaches?
Martinelli.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, Pete Martinelli was a strength coach, big macho strength coach, kind of typical, muscle.
Big man.
Big man, in a little man's body, I guess you could say. But he was like, he had the answer for everything. He was just the macho guy. But so, anyways, we were playing Nebraska in Norman, and I used to call. We were playing Nebraska, and then we were winning the game, and we're clinching the Big 8 championship, and everybody was. That's when I started throwing oranges, and so Pete's like right behind the bench, right, and everybody's throwing oranges on the field, and you just got to know Pete Martinelli. I mean, he's just about 5'4", it's like this, but you look back there, and Pete, we turn around, and then Pete's bent over on his knees, and he looks up, and he's got orange on all the top of his head, with like a pilling all over. And so he gets up and he goes, "You blankety blank, whatever, I'm gonna get you." Of course, there's about 80,000 people in the stands, like, okay. But I mean, it was the funniest thing, because you're just one of those guys you got to know. I mean, he was just, he's a tough man, tough guy.
What was the story you were telling the guys earlier today before we started this taping about an airplane ride? You had them in stitches. You sound like you had yourself a whole little...
Oh, yeah. I was 1974. Yeah. I'm going to speak at Hooks High School banquet, and you can understand why I'm going to go speak at this all-sports banquet in Hooks, Texas. And I go out to the airmen at Westheimer and Norman, and I think that I ought to take our great running back, Greg Pruitt, with me down there to let all the people in Hooks, Texas see Greg Pruitt, and I get our running back coach Wendell Mosley on the plane, and I can't remember Greg. Who else was with us? It was Wendell, me,
No,
you.
I think it was coach that gave
Bill Shimmick, who had Billy's area of recruiting for his assistant coach for us. So
No,
we all get on the plane.
He just had me.
No, he
lived in Hooks.
77 straight days.
77 straight. Well, anyway, we get on this airplane, and we leave Norman, and we hadn't been gone 3 or 4 minutes, and I want Greg to take over now. You tell what happened.
Oh, I had pulled a prank earlier on Shimmick, and I knew he was going to get me back. I just didn't know when. So I'm sitting on this plane, and I look out the window, and I see the propellers slow down. I'm saying, I ain't going for that. They trying to get me. So I looked at the engine, and smoke started coming out of it. So I didn't think they had that kind of control. So I looked back inside. I said, hey, this engine is stopped. And I looked at Coach Mosley. Coach Mosley is sitting up with the pilot. And he's just going through all these books. He's throwing books. And I said, Coach, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to learn how to land this on one engine. Which kind of broke the ice, because we was getting nervous. But the pilot, he stayed pretty cool, and we landed. And I really didn't get scared till after we landed. And then I realized that it was not a whole lot of pilots that could land a plane on one engine. He happened to be one of them. So
this is what happens. We land that plane, and I asked them, who's going with me on this next plane to Hooks, Texas? I went by myself. The cowards wouldn't get on it, but I was going to Hooks, Texas, February the 8th, 1974. You
took the bus home?
No, I stayed in Norman.
I couldn't get it. I could hold a gun to him. They won't get on that next airplane.
Here's something you may not know. Joe Washington and Greg Pruitt missed the bus because they were watching Kid Power. Take a quick break, and the fourth quarter will begin when you get back.